There she is. Brittany, thank you so much for being here.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay, I don't know why my name's showing up, Janelle. It might be because my Zoom is probably logged in under the Tourette's podcast that I also do, so I
Oh,
apologize. My name
cool.
my
Okay,
name
well,
is in fact Brittany, but it's showing up Janelle. My apologies.
yeah, we'll have to get all your links and resources so we can follow you.
Yeah, I can send them over to you right after this, not a problem.
Cool. Well, we read your book this week, so we're familiar with your story. That's a really great book. Thank you so much for sharing your story and just being willing to be out in the open and everything. Has this turned into like quite the project for you? How many, like, is this your career or tell
Writing
us?
isn't necessarily my career. However, it's something I've always wanted to do since I was a little kid. Getting my book published, I have it right here just in case there's any specific
Yeah.
questions. I was prepared. Um, I've always turned to writing for my outlet in life. It's the way that I've always gotten my feelings out the best. And ever since I was a little kid, or a little girl, I always wanted to write a book about my life with Tourette syndrome. It was a lifelong dream of mine, and I worked on it for a really, really long time. I unfortunately had a professor that drug me down quite a bit, and it put a pause on it for quite a few years because I couldn't get her, um, I'll just say it, nasty words out of my head. I couldn't get them out every
Like you
time.
were feeling so discouraged about yourself that you didn't have the confidence?
Yes, yes. She
Yeah.
unfortunately told me that I was a terrible writer multiple times and told me that
Oh
I
man.
wasn't going to make it and all of these, really encouraging things.
Wow.
Um, and so every time I wrote, still even to this day, sometimes when I'm writing, currently writing a second book, or I finished it, I'm editing it's my second book, and I still hear it every once in a while, but thankfully for the most part, I've erased that from my mind. But currently, for my full-time job, I actually work for the Tourette Association of America, and for people that don't know what it's actually the only national organization to help people with Tourette syndrome and other tic disorders. And that we serve all across the United States. We have a global ambassador over in the UK as well. We're trying to make a little bit more reach, but different countries have their own associations as well. Some of them do. And so what I do for them is I organize all of our special events and fundraising efforts. So I don't host all of them. I help all of our hosts with their fundraisers for the Tourette Association so that we can keep providing programming, funding, and research for Tourette syndrome, um, and just kind of trying to make a difference in as many people's lives as we can that live with the disorder.
That's so neat that you've been able to take the situation life handed you and just it turned into such a mission and a purpose for you, right?
Yes. Yeah, it has always been a passion. When I was younger, when I was diagnosed, I was 7 years old when I was diagnosed. And just for reference, I'm 35 years old now. So I've had my diagnosis for quite some time. I always tell people that in my body and in my mind, there wasn't a life before Tourette syndrome, like before tics. I have absolutely zero memories of living in a body that moved because it wanted to. I live inside of a body that moves whenever it wants to. That's not to say that all of my motions are tics. When I talk with my hands, it's just because I'm a hand talker. Uh, but for the most part, I never know what my body's going to do. And when I was younger, my parents never made me feel like I was different or weird or anything was wrong with me. My family was wonderful. I'm so lucky to have them. I have the greatest support system, but I never learned about it. I didn't learn about it in health class. I didn't hear people talking about it. And when I did hear people talking about it, it was normally to make fun of it. So much so to the point there was so much misinformation out there, and there still is. We've come a long way, but there's still a lot of misinformation out there. But when I was a child, my mom wouldn't let me actually watch any kind of program or anything about it until she watched it first because she wanted to make sure it wasn't going to be something, one, that just discouraged me the whole time and made fun of Tourette syndrome and all of that. But two, she didn't want me to just get all of these messages in my head of what I couldn't do and what I couldn't be growing up. Because when I got my diagnosis, while I was in the room with the doctor and my mom, she told my mom while I was sitting right there, well, don't expect her to do well in school because she won't. And thankfully, I'm a very stubborn person, and I'm not a person that's like you. I'm not a person that allows other people to dictate what I will and will not do. And I kind of took that as motivation, but a lot of other people don't do that. They take that as discouragement, and I don't. Like, don't get me wrong, there was a part of me, the part of the child in me that was still discouraged by hearing that. But there was also the part of me that was like, well, I'll show you what I can and can't do. And so because I didn't hear people talking about it or, sending the correct messages about it, I just figured I was going to. If nobody else was going to talk about it, then I'm going to. To any single person that will listen, I will talk about Tourette syndrome until I am blue in the face. It started with papers as I wrote in my book. I was able to write papers if I could choose a topic. It was the simplest thing for me to write about. It was the easiest way to teach everybody because my learned what I've learned over the years is the more casually I present it to people, the more casually it seems to be accepted. And so that has really helped me. And so writing the papers and being able to present in school, that was really my first like advocacy work, I guess I would say. And then when social media became a thing and the internet, I was able to take it that much further, but I've always turned to writing. Like it always has fallen back to writing when I have bad days. That's what I'm doing. I'm sitting on the couch in my bed writing. It was something my therapist also helped me find a love for again to just write for the day and just get my thoughts out. Something I was actually very recently trying to remind myself that I need to get back to, actually.
That's so great that you're bringing that awareness because this was interesting to me. Like, I have a psychology degree, clinical psychology, but I do not remember learning about Tourette's in my education. And so this was actually fairly new for me to also just be learning about it this week. It's been coming to my attention lately with someone in my life. And so I'm really thankful for the education, for, like you say, the awareness and the appreciation, get away from stereotypes. And
Yes.
so that's one reason I'm just so glad you're here with us, right? So that we can experience this. So maybe some people have questions. I wanted to ask you more about your diagnosis.
Yeah,
You were
definitely.
reading that you have to have a verbal tick and at least one other tick. Is that correct?
Yes, so you have to have, and I believe this is still a criteria for diagnosis today. Otherwise, you would most likely be diagnosed with either like a persistent tic disorder or just a tic disorder of some kind. You have to have at least two motor tics and one vocal tic that's present for an entire year to be diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. And I don't have a ton of vocal tics. This one that you've been hearing me do, that's actually new. I've developed that within the last uh, month or so, actually. And it's a little ramped up now again because I just got back from Washington, D.C., where the Trade Association was there. We were fighting actually on Capitol Hill to get our funding to remain for this Trade Association and for all of our programs, telehealth and things like that that affect our community. And when you're around other people with Tourette syndrome, as odd as it might sound that people to people that aren't a part of it, you can you can pick up other people's tics and you can also be triggered more. So I was hearing all kinds of,
Wow.
I was hearing all kinds of vocal tics. And because of that, makes my vocal tics act up. And I'm still kind of on the downward of that. And this is also a newer tic. But I used to usually just click my tongue. I would make some grunting sounds every once in a while. And I used to sniff a lot when I was a kid. And we never knew that was actually a tic. And you probably remember it in my book. I believe I wrote about my grandmother always yelling at me to stop sniffing. And we didn't realize that that was a tic when I was younger. And it's really funny because to this day, even with her memory not the best anymore, if that gets brought up in conversation, she still feels absolutely awful, even though, I don't blame her for that. My grandma's my biggest fan. So, but I don't blame her for that at all, but those were some of the ticks. And a lot of times when kids are young and parents are bringing them in, telling them like, they're clearing their throat all the time, they're sniffing all the time, they're blinking their eyes. Sometimes that gets written off as allergies, and that's what these parents are told. And that's not necessarily something that gets me too fired up. However, what I always tell people, like when parents tell me like they'll come to me and tell me sometimes and say like they're telling us that it's allergies, but I just know in my gut it's something else. It's something more than that. It's not just her sniffing, it's more. And so what I try to tell people sometimes is like look out for maybe it's done in a pattern or something like that. Really pay attention to what the kids are saying because a lot of times when it's kids too, it's hard to say because, we're kids and we can't sit still as it is. But when my mom really noticed it was I'm not going to say a problem, but it was something more when I would be watching TV and my neck would flick back or I would be moving
Right.
around or something. And that was in a time of where it wasn't me just not being able to sit still. It was just me just relaxing and it was happening. And so that's kind of what I tell parents too, to let the doctors know, like, no, she's doing it in like patterns of two or patterns of three. And because for me, my patterns are twos and even numbers. Because
What
OCD,
do you mean choose? Like you have to make a movement twice in a row?
yeah, I have to even it out or I have to do it
Oh.
twice, or some kind of even number. Um, it's part of my OCD that comes along with Tourette
Yeah, we
syndrome.
want to talk to you about the OCD also.
Yes, yeah. So a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people have co-occurring conditions with Tourette syndrome. I would say, this is not an official statistic, but in my point of view, I would say 90% of people with Tourette syndrome, it's never just tics. So I suffer from anxiety and OCD as well. I'm actually currently on anxiety medicine to put it all out there, something I started a couple years ago. And all of those things can really create the perfect storm for somebody with Tourette syndrome as well. When my anxiety rises, my tics rise right along with them. And when I can't get the OCD part of it where I can't even it out correctly. So say I have a foot kicking tic. It's something that I developed I don't even know how long I feel like it's been with me forever. Um, where I have to kick my feet on the ground. So two here, two here, two here, two here. Or sometimes I have to hop on one foot, tap my foot on the ground, hop on the other foot, tap it on the ground to even it out. And
So
if
you're a
my
natural dancer.
Yes, yes. Yeah, it's always been with me.
Tourette's made you a dancer.
Yes, my mom thinks my foot kicking tick might be because of my tap dancing years because I tend to do it sort of in like a rhythmic pattern a little bit. And if I don't even it out correctly, or if I do it on one foot and I don't do it right on the other foot, and that continues to happen, that like my brain, the easiest way I can explain this is almost like it makes my brain angry. And that's when my body starts to go into what we call a tick attack, where I start ticking really, really badly. For me personally, I don't breathe very well at all when I'm in a tick attack. That doesn't happen for everybody. You'll hear me say again, for me a lot in this just because every single version of Tourette syndrome is different and every person's lives with Tourette syndrome is different. So, but if I don't do that right and I don't even it out correctly, my body wants to do it faster and more precise. And the worse and worse I get at doing it, the worse my body is reacting to it. And I go into a tic attack. For anybody that has experience with them, it's kind of similar to an anxiety attack or a panic attack, but now you're just adding more ticks on top of that while it's happening.
So I had a question on that when you were describing that in your book. What is the difference between a tic attack and a seizure? Because both ways you lose control of your muscles.
Yes. Yeah, so a seizure, a lot of people, there is a lot of misunderstandings where people sometimes think that seizures and Tourette syndrome are similar or tic attacks are similar. I would say for me, as somebody that doesn't experience seizures, it'll be a little hard to explain the exact difference, but I know for a lot of people with seizures, it's like kind of like a complete out of body experience. Where for me, I'm aware that my tic attack is happening, very aware that it's happening. I might not be able to respond similar to the seizures, depending on how bad it is, or if I am ticking with my breath, or just depending. Because a lot of times, sometimes when I do my ticks, especially with my stomach, it's very hard to talk at the same time. So I would say for people, like it's kind of like holding your breath and trying to talk and speak at the same time for me when I'm doing a stomach tick. And
Wow.
so for me, I'm very aware of it. I can hear my husband talking to me or my mom talking to me, whoever is right there. And I'm very aware that it just happened when I came to, like when I come out of it. I believe like the big difference for the seizures too. And again, I'm not an expert on seizures in any way, but I believe that is that there's a lot more confusion, a lot more out of body, and not really knowing that that is what just happened when you have a
Yeah.
seizure compared to a tick attack.
Right. And I'm sure the EEG would show a difference, of course,
Yes, yeah,
the actual electrical activity in the brain.
yeah, yeah.
So when you talk about OCD, when do you know if you're having an urge that's a Tourette's urge or an OCD urge, right? Is Tourette's just more muscular, but OCD, you actually have the thought process?
That's a very good question. So I'm going to do my best to answer this because for me, a lot of them are very intertwined in my life. But so for me, my OCD is the compulsions and the intrusive thoughts that come with the compulsions. So if I don't do something right, something terrible is going to happen. So those types of, I have the intrusive thoughts of if I don't do this thing, everybody in my family's gonna die. Like those are the thoughts that happen with my OCD if I don't do things right. I have to pull the door behind me sometimes. I don't do this one as much anymore, but it still happens and I have to tap on the door. That's more of my OCD. That's I could stop it if I want to, but if I stopped it, my brain would tell me like the next bad thing that happens, that's because you didn't do that ritual of tapping the door behind you or something like
Right. That's the OCD, right? It's
yes,
just like you're
yes.
responsible for something or something bad's going to happen if you don't.
Yes, exactly. So that's the OCD part of it. The OCD, the or Tourettic OCD is how a lot of people explain it. With my Tourette syndrome, that's more of like the evening it out and making sure it's in like this nice little packaged bow, I guess I'll say, when I tick. And for the ticks themselves, a lot of times you do have a premonitory urge, is what it's called. I don't have them for every single tick. Some of my smaller, like tapping tip ticks. Sometimes I don't even realize that I'm doing it because it's so such a simple tick, which a simple tick is something like that, tapping my fingers or maybe just a simple shoulder movement or ticking with one body part. Where complex ticks, I can tick with multiple body parts at the same time, or my tick becomes more complex over the years. So, for example, my neck tick where I have to stretch it back, it has become more complex because my tick is no longer satisfied by just a small stretch of my neck. I have to stretch it as far back. It's almost to the point now where my neck doesn't stretch physically far back enough to satisfy the tick. And
Oh,
that
wow.
yeah, that causes a lot of pain. And so ticks can kind of morph and develop over the years. They can disappear, they can come back. You can develop new ticks, as I said. I could have brought home a new tick from DC and never had it again. I could have had it there and then it wasn't happening again. When I watch people's facial expressions, can become ticks for me. If people are very expressive with their eyes and their face, it it triggers my ticks immensely. When we're watching TV and somebody is very expressive, I have to turn away and ask my husband just to let me know when it's over so that I don't take too much and cause
Yeah.
myself to go into some kind of tick attack or something like that, or just to try to save myself a little bit because it can be not every tick is painful, but the repetitive motion and overuse that absolutely becomes painful after a while.
Yeah.
I have a
Almost like how yawns are contagious, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
That's
um
so interesting.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So in the book you kind of talked about how you were a little bit afraid to make other people uncomfortable with your tics. Has that
Yes.
kind of like gone away a little bit of you're more comfortable with yourself enough to like be around people? If that makes
Has
sense?
that Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's a very good question. I think it kind of depends on the day, if I'm being honest. We all have days where we just don't feel well, and not to get too into the weeds of that, but especially as women, we have days where we're just like, not today. And but I have gotten a lot more comfortable. What helped me. And my book was already out for this so I didn't get to put it in there. When I attended the Tourette conference in 2022 in Minneapolis, I thought before I went there, that was the very first time I was ever around people with Tourette syndrome in my entire life, like that many. And that was just 3 years ago. And so I went through my whole life not being able to feel that. Um, I thought I was way more comfortable than I was ticking in public until I was there and felt myself trying to suppress, and then realizing that I didn't have to there because I was normal there.
Yeah.
It kind of depends. If I'm around people that I know I'm comfortable with, my family, yeah. If they're with me in public, then I feel more comfortable. I have like my security blankets around me. But if I'm out by myself, the self-consciousness is definitely still there, and I still don't, especially like when I used to work in a office environment, I felt like I was burdening the people around me because I would slam my mouse and I would click and slam on my keyboard. So I would say in public places where it's really quiet or people don't know me and that I have Tourette syndrome, that's definitely still there. I think that's something that a lot of people with Tourette syndrome learn as we get older and it kind of comes and goes too. Certain days I'm like, you know what? I don't care what you think, and I don't care. I can't control it, so you're just gonna hear me. Other days I'm like, I just don't want to cause a scene or be a burden to anybody. And so I don't know. I guess that kind of answers your question, but not really. Some days yes, some days no. It's still very, very much so there where I'm trying to just make other people feel more comfortable so they don't know, so they don't have to tiptoe around me or feel like they're going to say the wrong thing or making me feel like I have to explain myself again.
Yes. So let's hear about how you manage. Okay, two questions. How you manage your tics. Your book talked about breathing. You just mean deep breaths in general, relaxations, or tell us more about when you're under that pressure, what do you do there with your those breathing exercises?
Yeah, so the breathing exercises, one, I've over the last year, I've started doing some guided meditations because for me, just trying to meditate by myself, my mind will go a million different places. I need a voice telling me what to do and how to breathe and things like that. That has helped because it gets my mind out of that place. When I first start to do it, when I first turn it on, like if I'm doing it to try to help calm me down, the tics are definitely still there, especially when I do it right before I go to sleep because when I'm going to sleep at night, basically like any tick that didn't get a chance to come out, that's where they're coming out. And so I get kind of a quick onslaught of ticks right before I fall asleep, as soon as I lay down. And so as soon as I start that meditation, if I'm doing it before bed, that's what's happening. And I have a very big trigger with my back when I'm up against something. Like I'm not sitting all the way against this couch right now because I tend to slam and rub my back against things if it's up against it. And so when I'm laying in bed, that's kind of what happens. So at the beginning of
It sounds like it's so hard to fall asleep at night.
it can be, yes, it can definitely very difficult to fall asleep and it causes some problems there. That's also where like that burden feeling kind of comes in sometimes for me because I feel like I'm burdening my husband because he's trying to fall asleep at the same time too. And he has never ever made me feel that way. He's wonderful. But that's all my brain telling me, like, you're causing other people to not be able to fall asleep right now. Like, what's wrong with you? Like those,
Mm.
the devil and the angel on your shoulder talking to me. But yeah, so I try to do those and then the breathing, it's kind of hard to do on my own when I am in the midst of the tics happening really badly. A lot of times I need somebody there reminding me that that's what I need to do. Because as silly as it sounds, it's just something that my body almost not forgets how to do, but almost like forgets to do in those moments. And it's kind of part of my tics that I can't breathe. And so my mom and my husband have really learned to like guide me through that breath. So kind of similar, like I need somebody telling me like, no, you need to breathe in now, you need to breathe out through your mouth. And that's just what my mom would do to kind of help me and pull me out. And my husband does now when he's the one with me when it's happening. And so I have to, because I breathe very quickly too when I start to, because you start to get worked up and you start to not hyperventilate, but my breath becomes shorter because I'm not breathing well. So I'm getting scared that I'm not breathing well. I don't know how long my tic attack is going to last. And if I'm having one in public, there's that added stress to it of people around me staring. And so I just need somebody to like, all right, look at me, only focus on me or focus on a spot on the ground, whatever it is. And then literally almost like they're teaching me how to breathe all over again. And I just need that in those moments. And it might take 2 minutes, it might take five, it might take 10. It depends on the day or how bad the tic attack was. And I can eventually pull myself back out of it. They'll get me a glass of water or something. I take this stuff, it's called Rescue Remedy. It's not for Tourette syndrome by any means, it's a natural stress relief. And because I'm worked up and stressed, it doesn't take my tics away. However, it can help pull me back down. And I've also turned to, in my later years, some CBD and stuff like that to try and help me, especially at night, to get my wandering thoughts to just give me a break.
I have a
That's
question.
great that you've, yeah, go ahead, Brinley.
Sorry. So you correlate like your tics and stress sometimes. Like,
Mhm.
does the stress come first or does the tics come first?
Um,
That makes sense. Like, which one is the cause of the other, and do they both worsen when you have more tics or get more anxiety?
Yes, absolutely. They both worsen. So the tics are always there. However, when I do have an increase in stress, really an increase in any emotion whatsoever, But my two biggest emotional triggers, I would say, is stress and excitement. So if I'm incredibly stressed out about something, I'm worried about something, my tics are on a rampage. But unfortunately, at the same time, when I'm incredibly excited about something, my ticks are on a rampage. And so the excitement will come, and then the increase in ticks will come after. So they're there baseline already, but then that increase comes after that added emotional um, feelings. So, like when I'm angry, if I get really worked up about something, or one thing that's very interesting for me in my life is that if I'm going through, I've noticed for me, if I'm going through a very hard, like grief induced period, like I lost somebody that I love, or something's happening that's really sad on the emotional scale, in the moments, it seems like when I'm in the heart of it and like the meat of it, my ticks are almost like in a backseat area. And it's as if once my life starts to get back to that reality point, you go back to work after you lose somebody or something like that, all those ticks come on now for me. And I don't know why that is for that. I don't know why that overabundance of like sadness and grief and stuff, but that's one particular emotional instance that I've noticed that my body kind of shuts down. I mean, it's kind of nice that that happens, but also in that sense, like where I'll get those feelings of like I'm crying and for whatever reason, I'm an angry crier too. It's not I hate it about myself, but I'm an angry crier. And after I'm done, you pull yourself together, all that stuff, that's when the tics will happen. So it's definitely a trigger. So yeah, baseline always there, the added emotion, that's what comes after is those ticks. And I always say that like I'm forced to kind of be a person that wears my heart on my sleeve because it's kind of impossible for me to not show that I'm excited or stressed or nervous. And so I'm never the kind of person that can pretend, I feel like, to be feeling better than I am because of that. But at the same time, it's one of the things, the excitement part of me is one of the things that I like most about myself. I get excited about the smallest things. So it's a blessing and a curse when it comes to the excitement trigger.
I mean, you're such a beautiful person. I can see, like, I love how you're animated and enthusiastic about life. I think your ticks are totally endearing. Like, I was so interested in your book to see how you got into a relationship and how marriage worked out for you. But, like, I can see your husband just falling in love with you because you're the cutest thing ever.
That's very sweet of you. Thank you.
And I'm glad that you're talking
Thank
about stress and even the natural remedies. I'm a big fan. We've talked a lot about that in this class. Like stress will make any condition worse, physical or mental. And so managing stress is a very important part of all of our daily life. Like it will bring on certain symptoms. So can you tell us, Brittany, what do you do just in general, besides you mentioned meditation, dance,
you.
what do you do in general just to, first of all, be aware of your stress levels, know when they're getting too high to manage that stress. Let's talk about that and then we'll go to Libby.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I turn to a lot, so in my book, you probably read about my dancing life and how much I love that. As I got older, there's not a lot of studios really that do adult dance classes, especially because for me, not only is it dancing that I love, but it was mostly being on stage dancing that I loved. So a lot of places will hold adult dance classes, which is still great for me. I still don't tick, but the stage is what I miss the most. And I also sometimes my knees just they took a beating dancing for 20 years. So, but have turned to exercise in my more recent years. For a little while there, I did some personal training on the side, but I noticed that I lost the time for me to focus on my body and my exercise, and that's something that I have needed. If I go a long period of time without exercise, like consistently, I notice my tics increasing again. So if I'm on a pretty good schedule, and I normally am, so this week, not only are my ticks a little more ramped up because I was around so many people, but because I was traveling and everything else, I didn't have the exercise portion. I might have walked a lot, but not like a focused exercise. So I like to walk. I love to lift weights, and it's not the same exact thing for dancing did to me. I'll still tick when I work out, but not nearly as much. And it gives me almost like an extended. So if I know that I have a stressful event coming up, I have something that I'm worried about coming up, I am making sure that I am downstairs in my little gym that I have in my house working out. I mean, gym, my area to work out in. Um, and making sure because it's getting that excess energy out of my body. And it's also, I think endorphins and working out is good for anybody going through stress. It can be a hard thing to go and do. and get started on. But for me, that is something that has become a constant in my life and something that I kind of desperately need to manage my stress. I need to be able to, and like when my stress is at an all-time high, I'll do a boxing class or something to get the additional stress out and the additional maybe anger that's there or frustration that's there. So exercise is something that I have turn to so much. Or I have three dogs. When I wrote the book, I had two at the time. One, unfortunately, is no longer with us that I wrote about in the book. But I have three dogs now, and they are wonderful for my tics. Like, I will lay on the floor with them, I will just pet them, I will force one of them to come cuddle with me to make it better. We have a younger dog. Her name is Chandler. I don't know if I have any Friends fans here, but she's absolutely named after Chandler Bing from Friends. That was her predecessor. Uh, she is a newer dog of ours. She's only a year and a half, and she is a golden retriever, and she has just been with no training, no nothing. She is so receptive to my tics. She has helped stop tic attacks while I have had them without any training or anything. So I always call them like my unofficial therapy dogs, especially her. And I always tell people, like, if you can manage a pet in your life when you have Tourette syndrome for your child or something, it can make such a huge difference. You know, dogs are just inherently loving and animals of any kind. I'm just more of a dog person. And I love all animals, but I am obsessed with dogs. I would have more, but my husband said three's the max, so I guess it is what it is. But um, so yeah, exercise, leaning on my dogs, or spending time with some of my family, or writing still, reading. I also am very into like adult coloring books. That helps. Things that like concentrate my mind can help to alleviate my tics a little bit. So when I was a kid on Christmas Eve, I would be very excited. I think I wrote about this in my book too, where I used to jump. I would always have to bring a book or a coloring book with me to my grandma's house because I was so excited for the next day, and I would have to do anything to help it. And so that is all of those things I still do to this day. I still have like the adult color by numbers or the adult coloring books or a kid coloring book. I don't care. I'm not I don't have pride when it comes to I want to color and it's soothing for me. I also have a coloring thing on my iPad with the pencil that I color on there sometimes because I can take that and not have to bring everything with me. And so really just a lot of things that brings my mind peace and that I enjoy doing. That's a big thing. A lot of people with Tourette syndrome, if they find like a sport activity, baseball or music, playing an instrument, those types of things, a lot of those things have shown to help people a lot. And I've heard a lot of stories where it has given them the same the same break that dance had given me in the past.
Dance is like the perfect trifecta. These therapeutic elements of art, music, and exercise. See how it's
Yep.
like all of them? I was just
Yep.
saying, like, I hope everybody can tap into one of those because, I'm thinking of people on the autism spectrum who aren't usually big on physical activity.
Yes.
They might not be big on art. Hopefully they can get into music, right? I just hope that everybody
Yes.
has one of those that they can tap into.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people, like some of the singers and stuff, they don't tick when they sing. And one interesting thing for me that I've noticed over the years, or not over the years, but more recently. So I took sign language in college, and I have hopeful plans of going back, not necessarily college, but just takes, I would love to be certified as an interpreter or just at least be fluent in the language. And myself and another friend of mine who, Janelle, her name that's coming up for me, is certified. And we have both talked about together how when we are signing or learning it and stuff, it seems to kind of eliminate our tics as well. And I think that's kind of also really beautiful because it takes away something for me that is hard and it helps me while I'm also helping somebody else. So it's kind of like a really beautiful thing that that happens. And I don't know if that's what made me fall in love with it when I started learning it. But had I known that I was going to love it, I probably would have went to school for that originally.
Olivia, let's go to you. You had a question.
Yeah. Awesome. Um, First of all, thank you so much for doing this. Like,
Yeah.
it's great to hear. And second of all, I had a question. Um, just like back to the hardest time of your life, whatever it may be. Um, what's one piece of advice you now who have grown and know how to kind of control your takes and kind of, I don't know, I feel like appreciate yourself more.
Mhm.
One piece of advice you would give yourself during that time?
I would tell myself not to be so hard on myself. I'm somebody that's very hard on myself. And as soon as you said one of the hardest times in my life, I knew exactly. And unfortunately, it was very recently. Um, it was 2023 was probably one of the hardest years. I was being discriminated against at my job prior, not my job now. Tourette Association's amazing. Obviously, they're very understanding about Tourette syndrome. I had accommodations being denied. I had some very ugly things being said to me by HR and presidents of HR and bosses that were supposed to be there to protect me. And, ADA, so the Americans with Disabilities Act, Tourette syndrome is classified as a disability with them. So by law, they are required to allow me to have accommodations as long as they are reasonable accommodations. And what I was asking for was, without getting too much into it, um, but I was having some of the hardest times in my life. It was probably the time in my life where I felt like the biggest burden to people around me. I was crying every day. I was having tic attacks multiple times every single day. I couldn't drive, and that's why I felt like a burden to my husband. He had to bring me anywhere I had to go, and because it was very dangerous. And I can most of the time, I would say 99% of the time driving, fine, because my mind, once again, I'm concentrated. I'll tick a little, but it's like my tapping ticks, and I just tap the back of the steering wheel. I can still drive perfectly safe with that. There have been moments where I've had to pull to the side of the road. I'm very aware of taking those safety precautions. I would say I'm probably hyper aware of that when I'm in the car, but I was being so hard on myself. I thought it was a good job, a very good job, and I thought I was ruining everything for my husband and I, everything that we worked for. I thought I was throwing it all away. I sat on the couch for the first time in my entire life, crying to my husband and telling him that I wish that I was somebody else. And in my entire life, I have never said that about me. Even on my hardest days of Tourette syndrome or any other day, I never said those words. And I wish I would have just gave myself some grace and reminded myself that what I was doing was brave by fighting for myself and the people. Because really, what I wanted to make sure was that nobody else felt like that again after me. I didn't want anybody to go through what I went through. And I wish I would have told myself, you're doing the right thing. You're being strong and you're being very, very brave by doing this. I can look back now and be very proud of myself for it. But when I was going through it, you would have not heard those words come out of my mouth at all. I would have told you I made a huge mistake. I shouldn't have done this. I should have just kept my mouth shut. I should have just let them treat me that way and just, bit my tongue. But I'm so proud of myself for that now. So I would say that if your gut is telling you that there's something wrong happening and you have to speak up respectfully, keep doing it. Keep fighting because the only way that I was able to make a change for me and the people behind me was by speaking up and doing what I was doing. I had to be that, I don't want to say getting big, but that hot spot, I guess, at that time. I don't know. I feel like all my answers are long-winded and I apologize, but yeah, it would be to not be so hard on myself. And that's probably something, advice that I could tell myself after anything that I go through ever, because I am my own worst critic at every single thing that I do in my life. But then afterwards it happens, I'm like, man, that was pretty cool. I did pretty good. But then in the time, I'm like, I'm so in my head. And yes, maybe also just leave your head a little bit. Like, if
Can I
that makes
quote
sense.
you on that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Leave your head a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
such a strong person. Oh my
Oh,
goodness.
thank you very much. That's
You're
very sweet.
amazing.
Thank you.
Let's go to Anderson.
Family member of Anderson. My question is, after you first started having tics, when did you have your first tic attack?
Oh man, that's a good question because I started having tics so young. It's hard to remember my first tic attack. I think one of the ones that I remember, one of the first few that stick out in my head, and I'm sure there were plenty more before this, but one that I remember a lot in my earlier years because it was middle school. And I started having one, we were watching a video in class, and I started having one in class. And thankfully, a friend of mine, I had very good friends that were very supportive. And my school system was honestly pretty good as well. But I had to leave the room, and my friend brought me out of the room, and she walked around the hallways with me until I was able to calm down a little bit and brought me to the nurse's station so that I could just sit on the cot. I remember this one because it was in front of classmates during a quiet time once again. And one because another reason because my friend was being so supportive, and it's something that I'll never forget. Her and I we're more acquaintances now, middle school friendship. But it's something that she always tells me that she remembers when we do talk, and something that I'll never forget. But what I also remember about this the most, because I went down to the nurse's station and I told them, like, all I need to do is sit or lay on the cot for a minute. I just need an area where I'm not around everybody and I can calm down. And I was trying to tell the nurse this, and she was saying, well, I need to call your mom. I'm going to call your mom. She was very worried and very concerned, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I was trying to tell her that I knew what I needed to do. And I knew I was a child at the time, and that might not have seemed like that was true to her, but I told her, like, you don't need to call my mom. All I need to do is sit here for a minute. I will talk to my mom when I get home. And my mom at the time, I don't think she was able to answer or something, and she left a message for her. And so obviously when I got home, my mom and I talked about it, and she even said, she's like, well, I'm not gonna, she's like, I'll call her back, I guess, but I'm like, she made sure I was okay. My mom is wonderful, is also wonderful and amazing. But it was that point where I think that I wasn't being taken as like the expert on my own body, because I think because I was a child and she was the adult, and she wasn't listening to me, to trying to tell her, like, no, this is all I need to do. I am okay. I just need you to let me be here by myself. And that, I think that's why I remember it so vividly. There were so many factors that went into it. It was one of the first take attacks I remember at school. But I would say that's one of the first take attacks that I remember the most vividly. I know there were numerous ones prior to that, though, since I was in middle school and I was diagnosed in elementary school.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Matthias.
Okay, so I was just wondering because I have a great grandpa that he would do this like mouth twitching thing. Like I was just wondering, like, because he that was the only one I really knew about, and I was just wondering, does that count as a tick? Like,
Yeah. So, sorry, I don't want to cut you off if you had more to that question.
Did you
I
say a
just
mouth
remembered.
twitchy thing?
Well, yeah, and I remember my mom telling me like that he learned it from some other person, and I was wondering,
Mm.
like, it didn't seem like he had Tourette syndrome, but it did
Yeah.
seem like he had that because it would interrupt his speech to do that mouth twitching thing. I was just wondering if that counted.
Yeah, so it all kind of depends too. And I just want to preface it too, I'm not a practicing doctor or physician or anything, but it definitely sounds like a tick of some kind, or twitch, tick, twitch, used interchangeably sometimes, but they're called ticks when we have them. It definitely sounds like a tick to me. I don't know that it would necessarily be Tourette syndrome. However, a lot of people, especially since you said great grandpa, a lot of people generations before me were never diagnosed with Tourette syndrome when they had it, because we didn't have the information out there, or things like this weren't talked about as much as they're talked about now, and so people wouldn't go to the doctor, or doctors don't know. A lot of times, still a lot of doctors, I teach a lot of my doctors about my Tourette syndrome, and so it's very possible that he could have had it and not been diagnosed. And to reference that too, we're pretty confident my father has Tourette syndrome, but he was never officially diagnosed. And it's not 100% certain that it's hereditary. It's something that's also still being very deeply researched. But for me, for example, if I were to have kids, there would be a 50% chance of them having Tourette syndrome. But then at the same time, my niece could have it, because it is known to be, a genetic situation, like a gene that can be passed down. And because of that, my brother and my sister-in-law are very watchful of my niece, and like sometimes we'll ask her, and they've done great. They've taught her about my Tourette syndrome from a very early age, so they know that Aunt Brittany sometimes just moves a little bit, and it's really sweet because sometimes when I'm ticking and stuff, she'll like squeeze me and give me a hug. And I think that's just her brain's way of being like, okay, Aunt Brittany's doing this thing. What can I do to make it better? Because she's very sweet, and her and I are like this. But my dad never went and got it checked out, because it just kind of, especially with knowing my grandpa looking back, that really wasn't a thing that they would do. The labels and everything else. It wasn't something that they wanted. But my dad and I, you might not see it not knowing him, but myself, my mom, even sometimes my husband, it's kind of like this unspoken thing that we're pretty confident that's where I got it from because there's just so many similar things that we do. For example, there's something called echolalia. It's part of Tourette syndrome, and it's where it's kind of sort of the almost like the catching ticks, where I'm watching somebody do something with their face and now I'm doing it because I have to do the same thing, and it's becoming a tick. So it's like people would think it's almost mocking, but it would seem maybe that I'm mocking somebody because I am having to do the same thing. And I have noticed that my dad and I do it when we watch TV. If we're together and we're watching TV, I have noticed because we both turn our faces to try and do it, where we've seen the facial expression, and sometimes we'll have turned the same way. And so I see him doing it. And so those little things people wouldn't notice. So it's very possible that somebody like your great grandfather could have had a tic disorder or Tourette syndrome. And it just, a lot of people, they just write it off. It's like, oh, it's just like this quirky thing that they do. And so that's what they write it off as, and they never go and get it checked out. And, that's to each his own kind of too. There's a lot of people that still are afraid to get that diagnosis. For me, I can't imagine not having a name for why I do all of these things, not having, that reason. But a lot of people, even still today with the statistics, 50% of people out there, it's said to be that are out there living with Tourette syndrome without a diagnosis, whether that's not access to proper neurologists or neurologists in general. If I wanted to go back to my neurologist right now, it would probably easily be a 6 month wait for me to get in because there's so few and far between. And you generally want a neurologist that is familiar with tic disorders and Tourette syndrome so that people aren't being misdiagnosed or mistreated in any way. That's not to say neurologists that don't have Tourette syndrome would mistreat somebody. It's just that's generally what you want is somebody that has the experience with it, just because it can be so um, unique, and you just want the right doctor diagnosing you. So without that kind of resource, it's very easy, especially in the generations prior to us, to have gone without anything. But for me, from what you're saying, it sounds like a tick to me in some way. I just can't say if it's Tourette syndrome or a tick disorder of any kind.
And that's one thing we need to clarify is like you can have a tick and because that video we watched said tick disorders and Tourette's. So I don't know that there's any other tick disorders other than just maybe generalized. Like if you're having
Yeah.
ticks, but you don't fit under the diagnostic criteria for Tourette's, then it's just like these other ticks.
Yeah, generally it's usually like a general tic disorder or a prominent tic disorder or sometimes chronic tic disorders. There's a lot of different titles for them, but generally if you have that criteria, and I will say too, in the right doctor, you'll get that Tourette syndrome diagnosis. I listened to a lot of stories this past few days of people going a long time with being misdiagnosed, being told that it was all in her head. Somebody told me, a mom was talking to me, a neurologist refused to give this young woman a Tourette syndrome diagnosis. And this is quoting from them that their doctor looked at her and said that she's too pretty to have Tourette syndrome, and I don't want that to follow her around, so I will not put that on her file. Which, when she said that, my mouth about dropped to the floor because that's just crazy behavior in my opinion for a medical professional. Because then it took 2 years then for her to get her diagnosis.
Wow. Wendy, you have another question? Anderson's mom?
This is Anderson's little sis, and I was wondering, um, I was, sorry, I want to say you're doing great, and I understand why, you're sometimes afraid to drive, and I understand why that happens, but I think you're still doing great, and I think you should keep it up.
No, well, thank you so much. That was so sweet. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, Brittany, you're doing really great. I just really loved in your book how you've got this healthy balance of optimism, this fighter spirit, but then you're also very real and vulnerable. And sometimes you experience anger. And it's just so healthy for us to know, like, yes, let's be optimistic, let's be proactive. We've talked about being creators, but let's be real about our emotions. Don't be ashamed of your emotions when we do have bad days, discouragement, anger, and fear. It's just really healthy. Experience all of it and just embrace it. Embrace this tough experience and these things that we go through in life. Another thing I really appreciated in her book was talking about receiving the support of, a certain friend who really understands you and can vouch for you, opening up to your parents, hopefully getting parents. I mean, I know not every teenager feels like they have unconditional love from their parents, and that might be tricky. I feel like you were very lucky,
Yes.
Brittany, and you were able to get married, and that might be a concern for people with a number of disorders, just like what relationships might look like for them. And I mean, there's just so many questions and so many great diversity in our experiences. So I hope that at least this gives hope to everybody.
Yeah.
And if you didn't read her book, please read her book. And we're gonna get information on, now I find your Facebook page and you mentioned a podcast. So give that to me after class and then I'll post it to my group.
Yeah. Yeah. My
Oh.
my husband was actually just recently on the podcast with me. We were doing a dating series for Valentine's Day throughout February, and he was on there.
Yeah, it'd be great to hear his perspective too.
Yes, he's wonderful. He's the best thing that I never thought I would ever have.
So thank you so much for your time. This has been amazing for the author of a book to come join us and just get to have a conversation with us. So we consider ourselves very lucky and to get to be with you today.
Well,
Okay,
I
guys.
consider myself lucky for being here. So thank all of you, all your questions, your engagement. It means a lot to me. I love doing this. So yeah, if anybody ever has any questions, for a quick reference, a lot of my stuff you'll see behind me, my little sign here. You can find my stuff at One Tick at a Time. It's my handle, I guess you can say.
And can they message you if they have more
Yeah,
questions?
absolutely. And if I don't answer, message again, because all social medias, they put them in all these weird folders. And if I haven't been friends with you, so don't be afraid to follow up after a little bit, because there's a very good chance maybe I won't see it. So message me, ask me questions. I try to keep up with the hidden folders all the time, but it can be hard.
Yes. All right, Brittany Wolf, you're an awesome person. Thank you. Great to meet you. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, bye
Yeah,
everybody. We'll see you
Thank
next
you
week.
so
you.
much.
Bye. Yeah, not a problem. Thank you.
Inspiration.